Hello and welcome back to the GC Sunscast. This is round 15, 2018. I'm your host Shane, and this time I'm not alone. Joining me again as usual is Tom. How are you, mate?
Yeah, g'day Shane. Good show last week. Glad to be back though, and plenty to talk about.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if you got the chance to watch too much of the football this weekend, but I'm here to help fill you in, and we'll have a discussion over a couple of things. We've got the Collingwood game to cover, the reserves game against Redland, the Allies match versus South Australia. We will also go into depth talking about some of the club's injuries and who's coming back. Will Tom Lynch stay or go? And we've got some questions coming through from Big Footy and Facebook to cover.
Sounds great. Let's get into it.
Okay. Gold Coast played Collingwood and kicked 8 goals, 12, 60 points to 14, 15, 99. So a 39-point loss. It was the second quarter that let the Suns down with a 1 goal 2 to 6 goals 3. However, the second half, the Suns came back and showed a bit of fight, conceding the first few goals to Collingwood. They managed to wrestle back the momentum in the second half with 4 goals 8 to 4 goals 9. So essentially, if you rule out that second quarter, the Suns only lost by 8 points.
Yeah, I mean, it's always one quarter, isn't it? Usually the third for us, and it looked like it was going that way again. But, you know, what a great fight back and a bit more accurate goal kicking than it could have been on.
It's usually that last quarter that we let the team off, but that's been sort of pegging back. It was the third quarter, I think, the other week, and second quarter this week. Might be the first quarter next week.
Yeah, I mean, I've been pretty happy with our first quarters. I mean, we don't always show on the scoreboard that we're you know, doing well, but getting out there and taking it up to the other team, we tend to get bashed up a bit. So, you know, that sort of second quarter letdown this time, I think we really took it up there. Stats wise, if you ignore the scoreboard, stats-wise, the team was actually performing pretty well all game, so it wasn't necessarily a big surprise to see a bit of scoreboard pressure sort of actually happening late. But you know, Collingwood have got a lot to lose. If they lost that game, that would potentially cost them a home final down the stretch. So they're up in the second spot now, and this is the difference between the Suns and a grand final contender.
Yeah, we were playing a good quality side. The stat that stands out the most from this game, which was a positive for the Suns, was our inside 50s. We won. We had 6 more inside 50s compared to Collingwood. But our disposal efficiency and efficiency inside 50 is what really hurt the Suns. It was well down, and it was either Collingwood's pressure or just the Suns' inability or fatigue to kick accurately.
Yeah, I mean, the marks inside 50 it sort of shows you the difference there, doesn't it? I think both teams had poor kicking for goal, but especially ours. But still, Crossley and Wright, I think combined have a combined average age. You know, if you look at our whole forward line's average age, it's pretty young, but it's pretty exciting. So a bit more inside 50 accuracy, you know, kicking to leading players, and suddenly we're going to see 60 points turn into 110, which is what you need to win a game.
Yeah, Crossley's definitely coming into form, finding his own feet at AFL level, and geez, he's a big boy. The hits that he lays, he's certainly going to win some NRL fans over to the club.
Was this the first time you'd seen him live?
Yeah, it was. This is the first time he's played at Metricon, I believe.
Yes, of course, with the first half of the season playing away. So, I mean, by half time in Ballarat, he was, the commentators were calling him a cult figure in the making. And, you know, in his 5th game, you can see what they're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Will Powell played his first game for the Suns. He had 10 disposals and kicked a goal. I think it might have been the first goal of the game. It was quite impressive. It just shows he's got that footy nous, and it looks like he'll be a good user of the ball and knows how to get into good positions. It wasn't exactly his first touch, but it was his first disposal in AFL football too, which
just shows you that he's going to score a lot of goals for us. His first actual touch of the ball was just tapping it on to Jack Martin, which, it was so great to see Jack Martin, playing the team game and putting Powell into space because he had faith in him. But a lot of things like that happen in practice, I'm told, that we just don't see. And now it's great for them to actually achieve it on the field.
Yeah, Powell looks like a real solid player, and given a few years of preseason and getting some weights under his belt, gaining a bit more weight, he should be a real strong player for the club. I won't go as far as saying he's superstar, but I can definitely see him being one of our star players. Stephen May had a good game back from injury with 14 marks and 25 disposals.
Yeah, I think Maisie, as a captain, only played a captain's game. There's probably a bit of rust. There's a few things that he'd rather have back. But I just love it when he gets his hands on the ball. He gets in there and just, I don't know if you'd say if he was the best player on the field, but he was making his presence known, and we need that. And it was very pleasing to see that normally 25 disposals this year get you up in the top 2 or 3, but there were 5 midfielders and defenders who managed to get their hands on the ball more than him, up in the 30s for Miller, Swallow and Lions. Don't know what's happening with Ainsworth. Not too much of the ball and not too much of only the one behind. No real influence on the match. What do you think?
I didn't even notice Ainsworth, to be honest. He's really dropped off over the last few weeks. But those midfielders you were talking about, Swallow, Miller, Lyons, they are all fantastic. Lyons had 20 contested possessions from his 32 disposals, and 12 of them were clearances. A lot of his clearances were rushed hack kicks out of the midfield, but he's making an impact and winning the ball for the Suns. The other player that was standing out was Jared Harbrow. He was just everywhere. He was cleaning up. He was hitting targets. He was a real force for the Suns.
Taking marks as well. Getting it out of 50, get out of defensive 50 and into inside 50. Sign him up. Bloody hell, he's still unsigned for next year. He'd be in the top 22 of any side in the country. But he belongs with us. As much as Richard Kelly, you would say, he's the spiritual leader. He's doing fantastic things at this stage of his career when you could excuse him for slowing down a bit or dropping off a bit or just being more conservative in his style to preserve his body. But he's in there busting through tackles. He makes a few clangers, but if you don't, 29 possessions for 7 clangers, I'll cop that. That's all right. I'd rather see him make those clangers and play the style of footy that he's playing because it helps us.
Well, there's 2 more players I want to send out congrats to. The first was Nick Holman. He kicked 2 goals, the only multiple goal scorer for the Suns, and had 18 disposals. He played his best game for the club. And Alex Sexton had 16 disposals, but he operated at 87% efficiency, which was the highest of any Suns player, and a shining light in a game where our disposal efficiency was well down.
Yeah, but it's guys like the efforts that they make like that, they're not the superstars, but you need them at your club, and they can run out games. That's what I'm most impressed about with Holman, especially. Sexton, we know he's a known quantity, but Holman, he's I think at the start of the year his motor was good, but now he's showing he's the one with endurance, and he'll keep tackling and keep trying, and he'll do roles. I think you might have a bit of a man crush on him because he's giving him different roles, and he's succeeding.
Yeah, he's definitely a great pickup from the rookie list. Now, the final topic from the Gold Coast Collingwood game was the crowd. We had 13,637 attend. It seemed like more at that from my point of view up in the stands, but there were a lot of Collingwood supporters, and probably more concerning was the amount of Collingwood supporters wearing Suns lanyards and having Suns memberships. So we'll touch on that later. We have a question relating to that. But it just shows that they weren't wrong on the broadcast when they said that the Collingwood fans outnumbered the Suns fans. So that's a big concern. But yeah, I just don't know. We should have had a bigger crowd than 13,000. Should have been up around 17,000 at least. But I guess the Suns' performance over the last month has sort of pushed a few people away. Let's for now move on to the reserves game. Gold Coast played Redland at Metricon just before the game. It was 15 goals 11, 101 to Redland's 10 goals 14, 74. So the Gold Coast Suns NEAFL team had a 27-point win, and they had less than 10 AFL listed players on their team. They were quite strong with 5 goals in each the first and second quarter to build out a strong lead going into half time. But a 5-6 third quarter by Redland put them back into the game, and the Gold Coast Suns had to fight hard in that last quarter to pull away with a win. Colin Jasny had 33 disposals. He was best on ground. He just looked all class. It won't be long till we see him back at AFL level again if he continues that. And Brodie and Lonergan were also in the top 3 for the Suns. Brodie had 31 disposals and Lonergan 26 disposals. So we've got some midfielders coming back. All 3 of them could really be in contention this week for the Suns if Dew decides to drop some players like Young or
possibly Ballard or Ainsworth. Yeah. Look. You know, Heron had a good game. Connor Nutting kicked a 60-metre bomb that one of the sealers for the game in the fourth quarter. And he's due for a debut. He's not in the best this week, but that can be a little bit subjective. I love seeing Lonergan back. I'd love to see him back in the AFL team. And Brodie, we pretty much rang the death knell for Colin Jasny, and he's come back and he came back last week and had an okay game. He's come back this week and it's just Colin Jasny and Daylight behind him for the best on ground. He got the 10 out of possible 10 votes, and that's all the coaches on both teams and all the umpires, and everyone's unanimous. It's not a common thing actually to get a 10 out of 10 in NEAFL. Who do we? If we keep the like for like selection policy, is it Colin Jasny comes in for Ballard?
Yeah, I think Ballard's due for a rest. But Colin Jasny's come back a new man since the club found out that he doesn't have concussion issues and he has an issue with his neck. So they've obviously found some treatment that seems to be working for Colin Jasny to help protect him, strengthen up his neck muscles. It looks really good. We could possibly see the return of Colin Jasny from 2-3 years ago in the year or two after his draft, where he just looked like he'd be a star for our club.
I mean, look, he did things in this NEAFL game that he never does. He was obviously running up the flank and up the wing, but it's a bloody glorious thing watching Cade Colin Jasny running out in the clear. He's got some wheels and he can bounce the ball, and he's got great delivery. So that was one thing that was, it was a game winner basically. The Suns NEAFL team is still carrying 16 or 17-year-old players who are all right, but and against a quaffle team basically, they're performing to the level where they're expected to, and it's going to be exciting to see which of these younger players will actually be drafted by us. But getting back to the AFL players, Colin Jasny's just he's gotten clearances and he's kicked a goal. One of the things that he's not so great at is goal kicking, but I guess if you've got time and you're not allowed to do full contact training, bit of practice in goal kicking there, Cade, it's paying off.
Yeah, they definitely need to do some goal kicking practice at the AFL level. You mentioned the young players coming through. We've got a draft crop coming through this year, and there's quite a few Suns Academy players involved playing for the Allies at the moment. They played South Australia on the weekend, and you've got the wrap of that game, don't you?
Yeah. Look, the exciting thing that I was looking forward to, I mean, I didn't get to watch the game, and they do have just like the NEFL, they do a stream. Now, unfortunately, South Australia beat the Allies, but that's to be expected given that they're unbeaten, and they face off with Vic Metro next week for the under-18 title. I'm not exactly sure when that is. It might even be the curtain raiser to the North Suns game. I'll have to have a look at that. So being done, it was probably a similar scoreline to the actual Suns game, 90 to 66, a little bit closer. Look, the South Australians have about 3 potential top 10 picks. They have Lukosius, who is everyone's predicting him to be number 1. He was being marked by the Suns Allies player Dirk Conan, who's a North Queenslander who plays for PBC. Lukosius didn't play all of his footy in the forward line, but when he did, he was marked by Conan. And Conan's been selected at centre half back ahead of Caleb Graham, who's the other Suns Allies player, who who has been terrific as well. So the two of them are 194, 195 centimetres, and very likely to be at this stage look very likely to be drafted either in the national draft or the rookie draft by the Suns at the end of this year. But the name everyone wants to hear is Bailey Scott, and for the 3rd game in a row for the Allies, he's kicked a couple of goals and he's picked up a bunch of touches, and he's 22 disposals, and he's playing as a sort of high half forward / midfielder, and he's been named in the best for the Allies in all 3 games. So, he's got to be our number 1 priority.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully the Suns get him. He's got a choice between North Melbourne, Geelong and Gold Coast because of his father playing at North Melbourne and Geelong, and he's lived up here for a number of years to be included in the Suns Academy. I've got a second-hand information from a friend of a family member of Bailey Scott, and he's claiming that his parents are desperately keen on him to stick around and play for the Gold Coast. They think that he'll get more opportunity and obviously be close to home and close to family. So that's good news if he follows up and does what his parents want him to do. Bailey Scott should be playing in Suns colours next year.
Well, he should be playing in Suns colours anyway because he's from our academy, but I do understand the father-son has been around forever. I mean, for those listening who don't really know who Bailey's father is Robert Scott. He played for Geelong in losing grand finals. I love watching Geelong lose a grand final. And he played for North Melbourne in the 90s in their one of their winning grand finals, and he was controversially left out of the grand final side in one of the other ones. So, although the family are denying that that's not a factor, how would you feel going to the club that dropped your dad on grand final eve? I don't think he's going to North Melbourne.
Yeah, like I said, let's hope Bailey Scott ends up at the Suns. But for now, let's talk about our injuries. We've had a pretty nasty injury crisis this year, but we seem to be getting players back. We had Stephen May come back last week, and we've got Rosa, Bose, Fiorini and Hanley expected to return in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So that's some good news. Yeah,
the NEFL has a bye next week, so if any of them were ready this week, they're not going to play AFL. So the week after that, if all 4 of them line up for the NEFL team, that would be terrific. Certainly the NEFL team's been suffering a lot. It'd be so great if the NEFL team got to play finals again and even, went deep into finals because of the experience for those younger players. So yeah, looking forward to seeing the four. Imagine how much better does the side become with those four names. They're all top 22, first picked. And we've really missed them.
Well, the Neefle team's going to need some help as they've lost Josh Jaska for the season with a wrist injury. That's the only bad injury news coming out of the weekend. There was, of course, the injury news last week, which came out after the podcast, where Tom Lynch has gone in for surgery for his PCL and will be out for the year. This has brought up a lot of questions over whether Tom Lynch is staying, whether he's going. Obviously, there's no reason for him not to come out now, as he's not going to be playing for the Suns this year anyway.
Interesting to see that he's not on the Gold Coast Suns website injury list. So I don't know what that means, but I'm sure it was just an omission on their behalf. Sometimes you miss the most obvious things. But yeah, it's just another thing, isn't it? It seems like another foot out the door.
Yeah, well, you can put this down to the media stirring the pot a bit. You know, it seems like they're pushing for all Gold Coast players to leave at the moment, with talk of Stephen May going and Brody and Scrimshaw, and I don't know, probably half the list are out the door. But it is concerning when reports are surfacing that he refused to do a press conference last week regarding his PCL. Yeah, that doesn't sound like a man that's committed to the football club. We all know Tom Lynch has trouble with media responsibilities. He always looks a little bit awkward in front of the camera, especially not after a game of football. So, yeah. Is that just him just being awkward and not wanting to put himself in that position, or does he have something to hide? Does he not want to be put in that? Does he not want to put himself in that position in case he comes out with something?
Yeah, well, I think tick all of the above. I think there's a lot of competing things going on in that young man's mind. He did do a canned interview, pre-recorded, that went onto the Sun's website. That's what the media have been sort of distributing. But as the captain of the club, to not do a press conference as the club wished, it just comes across as kind of weak. It's not winning any fans by doing it, and you know, who cares if he's nervous or if he's got something to hide or whatever? He's been given all the media training that any football player could want, and he's still a bit useless. So I'm losing patience with that side of Tom Lynch. Who cares if he hasn't made up his mind or whatever? He's the captain of the club. Come out, say what you're going to say, answer a few questions from the media. Media are local media. They all know that he's nervous and they know that he's no good when he's unscripted. But, you know, what's the worst that could possibly happen? You know what I mean? Like, he would be, in that situation, he would be coached. And if someone asks an inappropriate or unacceptable question, just get up and walk out.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like we've got, you know, the AFL House and all the Herald Sun reporters and the AFL Fox footy team on the Gold Coast. So you'd think there'd be 2 or 3 reporters there max, maybe someone from each of the major papers and someone from the news, and that would be it, you'd think. Yeah, it'll be Hamo and Whiting and a handful of others. Hamilton would be there asking a few bloody questions that are quite pointed about the latest Melbourne rumours or whatever. Whiting would know from past experience. Don't ask him a tough question because you're not going to get a decent answer. But he still wouldn't do it. So, you know, I mean, it's almost like people just want him to go, so it's done with. Like, you don't see big bloody banners at the Metricon saying, "Please don't go, Tom, stay with us." You know, people are past that point. They're like, well, you know, if it's going to take you, imagine asking a girl to marry you and then she takes 6 months. You'd be just about ready to bloody pack her stuff up and kick her out, wouldn't you? It does seem like that's what's happening up here. A lot of the Gold Coast public, or those that care about AFL on the Gold Coast, they're all seeing the similarities that this is drawing to previous years when O'Meara left and Ablett left. It's all just following down the same path, and there's not that much hope left anymore. It's pretty much conceded that we'd probably rather have you gone if you're not going to commit. That money could be spent elsewhere. We've already been linked to players like Jake Lloyd from Sydney. So that $1 million and a bit that was going to go to Tom Lynch, that could quite easily be spent elsewhere, and a lot of people are probably preferring that at the moment, plus with the benefit of having a priority pick or a very high draft pick for compensation for losing Lynch.
Yeah, look, I think that, given that the fact that we've got quite a lot of players to sign, and if we could sign them for a little bit more than possibly what they're worth, but still, lock them in for a good 4 years, then, we're going to be strong no matter what. But if we have to, mortgage the future of the list to offer Tom what he's demanding, it becomes like it's not even worth it. Like, when was his last really good game? I mean, we've called.
Well, you go back to the Carlton game this year, but to be honest, watching that, I thought Lynch just had a lot of luck in that game. I don't think he took too many contested marks. They were all sort of just, fall right in front of him. He picked him up and kicked a goal, sort of thing.
I can tell you right now, the ones I saw that I was right next to, McPherson and Sexton and Kolajasny, were all servicing him, very well to get those goals, putting him laces out on the chest so he couldn't stuff it up. And there were a couple of things that he did that you just went, oh my God, why did he kick it from there when you had a teammate 20 metres away directly in front? Why did he play up? He got a couple of free kicks and scored goals. So, that wasn't Tom Lynch at his best. That was just showing Tom Lynch can kick 8 goals. But there's probably been flashes of it since, and he hasn't really played that many games this year. So you got to go back to the before last year, because he was ordinary last year. So I think for a lot of fans, we're also going, he's not really all that much chop. He
does seem that way. We haven't seen the best of Tom Lynch for a couple of years now, and we've either forgotten what he really is capable of, or realised that he's probably just a little overrated, had one good year, and sell him off to the highest bidder and get as much as we can for him, really.
Yeah, and I mean, does his choice come into it very much? Well, if Hawthorn's offering something better than what Collingwood's offering, then he's going to the Hawks, as far as I'm concerned. Once he's made that decision, and that's another thing, isn't it? He's got to sort of say to the Suns, I'm not staying, and then announce it.
Yeah.
And then it's on, and all the speculation on. He's not playing. And if he says he's not playing for the Suns next year either, just announce it. It's fine. We pay you out.
Have more respect if he just did come out and announce that he was leaving. A lot of the Gold Coast supporters would just accept it and move on. The longer this drags out, it just makes him look weak and pisses off a lot of people at the Suns.
Yeah. And if we know he's not coming, then that changes our recruitment strategy, doesn't it? That changes quite a lot of things.
Yeah, it certainly does.
If we were going to get rid of someone like maybe Jack Leslie, I know he's not a forward, but he's a tall. Now you keep him, don't you? Because you need as many talls as you've got. If you're going to have someone like Sam Day, who is the foundation player, but perhaps there was thoughts of moving him on. Well, you kind of have to keep him if Lynch goes. So there's quite a lot to really unpack. So as usual, I'm more of the opinion that he's leaving than staying, and there's absolutely zero that's convinced me otherwise.
Yeah, well, there's still a lot to play out in that Tom Lynch saga this year. Let's move on. We've had some questions come through. I've recently started sending the podcast out and sharing it on a couple of Facebook pages. The first one is Gold Coast Suns AFL members, and the second is GC Suns fans' latest news and gossip. So if you're on Facebook, jump onto these sites, chat with fellow Suns supporters, and get involved in that community. We're also on there, and you can ask us questions through that. But we've had one question come back for this episode from Aaron Reardon. He asks, what's going on with Scrimshaw and Brodie? Other top 10 picks are tearing it up and they can't get a game. Are they wasted picks, homesick, or just slow developing? Now, we've discussed Brodie before. Rumours going around that he has work ethic issues, laziness, whatever you want to call it, just not committed. But I think over the last few weeks, he's really shown something. Last week it was leadership. The week just gone, he kicked a couple of goals and stood up on field. So I think he's developing, and he'll be playing AFL soon if he keeps this development up. So I would put Brodie down to just being slowly developed. And Scrimshaw, he's had a lot of injuries, especially this year. And if it wasn't for those injuries, I would imagine he'd be in the AFL side by now. So it's probably more just bad luck has hampered his development. I don't think they're wasted picks. It's still too early to tell that. But there are homesick rumours coming out. However, I don't think it's affecting them. They're still performing fairly well in the NEAFL. It just seems to be that next step to get into the AFL. We were discussing off-air that Rodney Eade has had a history of awkwardness with some of these young players, and there were rumours that he wasn't on the best of terms with handling and looking after younger players. So Brodie and Scrimshaw in their first year last year.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think Rodney Eade may have affected them?
So, first of all, when Scrimshaw very first arrived at the club, the first thing Rodney Eade said was, hit the bench, mate, hit the gym, and, you're too scrawny, you're never going to play AFL football. So, immediately you've got a young bloke who knows that the coach doesn't want him in his AFL team until he's put on a significant amount of weight. Well, I mean, that's not a new story, but there's different ways to handle it. And so, just belittling the guy and saying you're not going to be playing in round one. Even though you're number 6 draft pick. And with Brodie, some of the listeners will have seen this video when a new player is going to debut. The Suns website like to go and make a nice feel-good video, and they do a good job of that. The Brodie debut video was a train wreck. So Eade comes around the corner, and Brodie's sitting there with, I think it was Solomon, and Brodie's there. And he's concentrating on watching some game footage or whatever, and Eade just sort of comes in and tries to crack some sort of joke about Brodie slacking off or something, and it just goes down like a lead balloon, and everyone's awkward and silent, and then Eade sort of goes, "Oh, you're playing this weekend," and there's just like an awkward handshake, and then Eade pisses off. And then it hits Brodie suddenly. You can see that he's, elated and shocked and all the rest of it. He hugs Solomon, and that's how he found out he was going to make his AFL debut. So obvious that the two of them had a poisonous relationship, and that Brodie hated him and was scared of him. So I think you can put a lot of it down to Rocket. Yeah, he's not dealt well with those two in particular, and he's set him back a bit. But again, as you said, Scrimshaw had the injuries, and Brodie this year hasn't quite been, he's been complained of soreness after games. He was rested for 1 week due to soreness. I think he might have had the flu or something as well. I mean, he's never quite been at a point where the selection committee can just say, we're gonna pick you and stick with you, because he's always just got these little risks, niggling injuries or whatever. So we'll see both of them come back into the team pretty soon, maybe even this week.
Yeah, quite possibly. The second question comes from much loved Mr. Bods on Big Footy. He says supposed Suns members are turning up in Collingwood gear. How do we get players to be all in and passionate when our own fans have turncoat tendencies? So that's really more of a statement, but he is right. It didn't look too good when we were out. Suns fans were outnumbered probably 5-1 by Collingwood fans at our own home ground. It is concerning. Essentially, the question is, how do we get people to jump onto the Suns as their first team?
Yeah, well, the easy answer is win a premiership. Not so easy to achieve. Look, I was a Lions supporter before I was a Suns supporter, and so, but I was a Bears supporter before I was a Lions supporter. So, for me, it was a no-brainer to switch to the Suns. But for a little while, I had the two-team thing going. It's hard to, you have loyalty and you have your team. But you know what? The first Q clash that just showed me that I would never be able to cheer for the Lions again against the Suns, and it was a definite order. I don't hate the Lions like some Suns fans do, and I hope that the Lions have success and wish them all the best. And I've still got a lot of favourite players and whatnot, but it's not so easy, I think, for some fans just to give up their prior loyalty, especially when there's no success or limited success. I mean, you yourself were a Crows fan. Did you find it far easier to jump onto the Suns? Tell us about your first game when you had to watch the Suns and the Crows.
Yeah, well, I spoke last week about how I was a Crows fan, and in the first season I definitely abandoned that ship and jumped onto the Suns. At the time, the Crows were performing pretty badly as well, and I think I just found more hope, and I could see a brighter future watching the young Suns kids play each week than watching the Crows fail from the expectations I had from them. So that probably helped in a way, but I think in essence it came down to the fact I live on the Gold Coast. I see the Gold Coast team every single week, either live or on TV. They're my team. They're the team I support. I want to support the Gold Coast community. And as I've gotten older, that's just more solidified as I see the Gold Coast as my home. I don't see myself as a South Australian anymore. And I just want to see the Gold Coast community perform and be as strong as they can. Mr. Bods himself is a proud Gold Coaster. You're based in Victoria, aren't you, Tom? So were you born on the Gold Coast? What's your relation to Gold Coast to make you switch from Brisbane to the Gold Coast?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was born on the Gold Coast. I grew up in Southport, went to Southport, went to school in Southport Sharks were my team. And then in 1987, when I was a 12-year-old, how old was I? 11-year-old kid, my stepfather, who's Victorian, and this is where the half rugby league, half AFL part of me comes from. My stepfather said, jump in the car, we're going to go to the footy. And I'd watched, Hawthorn and Carlton on telly. I'd watched a few grand finals. I generally tended to stay out of the old man's way when he was watching footy on a Saturday because it usually involved him, wanting to throw a stubby at the telly because he was a bloody Richmond fan back then, and I can tell you they didn't go very well in the mid to late 80s. So it was very easy for him to jump off Richmond, even though that was a lifelong thing, and jump onto the Bears. So we all did that. I didn't have a team. I liked the Hawks because Doug still played there. I still secretly cheered for the Hawks in grand finals, but that was the extent of it. Then, of course, the Bears merged with the Lions. I was living in Brisbane for a number of years at that point and actually worked at the Gabba for a few years in corporate boxes. So my Saturdays were working in a corporate box and pretty much watching the whole game from a really great vantage point. And this was before the premiership years, but not long before. And watching the team get up and about. So I had a very close, very passionate about the team at that point. Then when the Gold Coast franchise was first announced in 2007, I happened to be living back in the Gold Coast. So I made that decision at that time. But if you will recall, the Lions had a pretty acrimonious fall from the top of the footy world. I didn't like how they split with Ackermanis. That was, to me, that was, he's taken pay cuts for years, and then he's done media to make up the extra money, and then you crucify him for what he says in the media. Well, maybe they were right about it, but I didn't like it. Ultimately, the way they treated Voss in the end was, it was after I'd committed to the Suns. The whole Fev thing, I hated it from the beginning. What they had to give up to get him, and then what he played 15 games or something. So yeah. But another thing I have to say about being a Brisbane fan and having worked there and having gone to a lot of games at the Gabba, when Collingwood played, there'd often be just as many Collingwood supporters in the stands.
It does. It's more concerning seeing Suns members wearing different coloured shirts compared to the tried and true Suns members. But you can't change that. It's going to be team performance, which is really going to change the majority of them. If they're not prepared to abandon their past and jump on board with, where they live and support the local community, well, that's up to them.
Yeah, I still would like to see a bit of, a bit more bloody loyalty from fans. I mean, whacking on your Collingwood jersey because you're about to go watch them thrash what's supposed to be your team, and then I can imagine they'd be carrying on as well, and that's kind of the worst part of it. It's one of those things that I've had a few altercations on Facebook and on Big Footy or whatever with people who are saying, get stuffed. I'm not going to give up my first team. The Gold Coast are my second team, but I kind of figure, well, you only have one team, can't you? So welcome their support. Can sort of understand why you might buy a membership to support your local team. The AFL is certainly not the number one sport or number two sport out of the footy cards. Talking to my soccer playing cousins, Gold Coast Suns are pretty low on their radar, and of course rugby league is king. So all the support we can get from former Victorians, and there are a lot of South Australians and probably a few Western Australians living on the Gold Coast who will buy a membership to be able to go to see games because their team's coming and they like the football. So there is that too, Mr. Bonds. You kind of got people who are actually shelling out and helping the club. And I think from my experience with the Bears and the Lions, a lot of those supporters will come over holeless bowless once there's success. So that could be a while away. The crowd numbers, fantastic. So can't fault them, even if they were mostly Collingwood.
All right, well, that just about does us for the day. There's one last thing to go over, and that's the North Melbourne game coming up this weekend. On paper, I actually think the stats are pretty similar. We tend to match up quite well against North Melbourne. We've won 5 of the last 7 games against them, and we've won the last 2 games against North Melbourne. The only thing that's concerning is North Melbourne's firepower up forward, but they've suffered injuries with Waite and now Mason Wood injured. So it really only leaves Ben Brown as the main target. And I think with a fit May and Thompson, we should be able to quell his influence. So yeah. I actually think the Suns are in with a chance this week.
They're our bunnies, aren't they? We match up incredibly well. They just don't know how to contain some of our more explosive players. They're so heavily reliant on their big forwards, and a bit like the West Coast Eagles, who we haven't mentioned, but they've lost 3 in a row. So our number one, our first round draft picks going back into single digit territory pretty quickly. North are on the same sort of slide. Without their big guys, they're nothing. If Thompson whose 100th game is this week, if he can have play his best and keep Big Benny Brown to ideally to nothing, but keep him to 2 or 3 would be a win. Then they're screwed. They've got no other way to kick a winning score. Then the assumption is that we do somehow get up. Well, their defenders, can they handle Peter Wright as well as Collingwood's defenders did?
They're not big name players. Scott Thompson has been around it for a while, so he's a pretty good defender himself.
Not very big though. And
it's really gonna depend on, I think, the Suns' smaller forwards and our midfielders getting amongst the goals as well. So in the end, I think we can probably pull out a victory. I think it would be single digits, maybe 8 or 9 points. What do you think?
I'm going to be there. I will be the idiot carrying the very, very large Suns flag behind the goals with the Sun Screamers. And Rory Thompson, son of a Southport Shark multiple premiership winning player, so he's a bit like a father-son for us. So his 100th game, that I'm sure his family will be there for that. Yep, I'm going to say Suns in 2 goals, maybe by 2 goals. Low scoring.
That's pretty positive for the last few weeks anyway.
Exactly.
With Brisbane playing Carlton as well the day before, I think. It's
the Walsh Lukosius Cup, they're calling it.
Yeah. I mean, if Suns fans start getting disappointed if we win this game against North Melbourne and miss out on the opportunity to slide back further down the ladder, that's pretty laughable in my opinion. Getting wins for confidence for a young team is so much more valuable than to improve your chances of getting a particular player.
Couldn't agree more, Shane. You don't even know what's going to happen. You can't control it. So if the only way you can control getting a high pick is to lose, it's not a very good tactic, is it? Carlton have done it in the past. Melbourne have done it in the past. It doesn't build a good culture. Melbourne are another team that are going backwards. We might even find ourselves facing Melbourne later this year and having a win at the MCG.
I think you're pulling a long straw there.
They haven't been very good.
Neither have we.
Yeah, true. Look, I think on a closing note, the Suns' best way to win fans and win admiration, and maybe shut up a few of the louder. The longer this losing streak goes on, some of the louder people like Caroline Wilson, if you can beat a few teams and maybe cause a couple of upsets. I mean, imagine if we'd beaten Collingwood, the whole AFL media would have gone berserk. So we probably need one of those kinds of wins. What do you reckon?
Yeah, we certainly do. All right, well, we've gone on for far too long as usual. Let's wrap it up there, and I'll chat to you next week.
Yeah, terrific. All right, see you then.
All right, thanks, Tom. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the GC Sunscast. If you like what you hear, please get involved in our small community over on bigfooty.com on the Gold Coast board. Chat with myself, Sunners, and Tom, 17er, as well as dozens of other Gold Coast fans. You can reach me on Facebook or Twitter at 32bitshane or email me 32bitshane@gmail.com with any queries. Leave a comment or review on iTunes and SoundCloud, or a donation on Patreon. Just search GC Sunscast. Donations are in US dollars and will go towards reliable tech and hosting the podcast so listeners have access to our earlier episodes. Thanks again. Go Suns!